Hello and welcome to First in Future Live. We thank you whether you're joining us via LinkedIn Live or Facebook Live or YouTube, via our website, emergingissues.org. However you're seeing the program, we're glad that you are with us and part of this program today. Today, we're talking about the second part of a twin challenge. Some of you may remember that last time we talked about the challenge that we have of not enough workers of any sort in North Carolina. That's episode 263 if you're interested. Today, we want to talk about a second part of that challenge, and that is that North Carolina right now does not have enough workers at the right education level. So if people don't have the right skills for the jobs that companies are offering, they won't get hired. If companies don't have enough skilled workers to do the work that they want to do, they aren't going to stay here. Today, we want to focus on one of North Carolina's biggest hidden assets, a group that some people call by the code name of SCND, and on a new strategy that the UNC system is launching to help reach them, a project called Kitty Hawk. All right, enough code names. Let's take a look at adult learners in North Carolina right now. Right now, in North Carolina, there are more than 1.5 million adults who are 25 and older that started college but have no degree. That number is going to grow by 2029 to 1.65 million. By the end of the decade, that's where we're going to be. About 20% of our adult population is going to have some college but no degree. Meanwhile, our state is projecting that by the end of the decade, we're going to need more than 2 million people aged 25 to 44 who have some sort of degree beyond high school. And if we don't do anything about it, we're going to fall 400,000 people short. So there's all sorts of nuance in these numbers, but in broad terms, we have 1.5 million adults who've started a degree but haven't finished. Some of them are retired. Some of them don't want to come back to school. But if we could get even a quarter of them across the finish line, then that would go a long way towards solving some of the big challenges that North Carolina has when it comes to our workforce. Today, we want to talk with 3 people who are taking up that challenge at very different levels. A person who's leading the thinking on how our public universities can do a better job of getting adult college students across the finish line. A woman who's working at NC State on adult education every day. And a student at UNC Charlotte who is living it, trying to figure out how to come back to college and complete a degree as an adult. Short answer, it ain't easy. And that's our topic for today. I want to start today with Dr. Andrew Kelly. Andrew is a thinker. He's a writer. He's an adjunct professor at UNC Chapel Hill. He's also the senior VP for the UNC System for Policy and Strategy. Andrew, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Leslie. It's great to be here, and I love IEI's programming, so it's a pleasure to be part of it.
Thank you. You've helped us out in the past, and wanted to turn to you today because I recently heard you give a speech to the boards of trustees of all 16 public universities in the state, in which you shared some of that data that I referenced at the beginning. You showed them the number of adults who've attended college, but for whatever reason haven't gotten a degree. I wonder if you could talk about why the system, the UNC system, is paying so much attention now to adults and what the role of adults getting those degrees is going to play in North Carolina's future.
Absolutely. And you started us off on exactly the right foot, Leslie, because primary reason we're paying so much attention to this group, this some college no degree, I won't use the code name, but is in part because of the attainment goal that the state has set for itself of 2 million North Carolinians with some credential beyond high school by 2030. The truth of the matter is we can't get there to that number if we only serve the traditional 18 to 24-year-old population. So we know we've got to think more creatively about who we serve and how we serve them in our system, in particular at the UNC system. A second reason is because when you look at the demographic trends in the state, we are a growing state, and we've had the benefit of being a growing state for many, many years. which has driven, as you'd imagine, growth in the traditional age student population year over year over year, really. We've seen just remarkable growth in the number of 18 to 24-year-olds, the number of high school graduates. However you count it, the curve has been upward and pretty steep, which is great for the state and great for a university system, because that's its primary role, is to educate those up and coming students. When you look into the future, given changes in fertility rates, the population of 18 to 24-year-olds is due to level off. And so as a university system, you need to think strategically about what markets do you serve and how do you continue to serve the needs of the state, given changing demographics. And then the last thing I would say is really on a human level. We have not traditionally offered much to working adults, those that have responsibilities about vis-a-vis family, their jobs, oftentimes caring for parents, who cannot uproot and move to one of our wonderful college towns, one of our 16 wonderful campuses. And we have traditionally not done a whole lot of work to provide options for that group of students. And on a basic level, not only human level, not only economic level, but also a human level, we owe it to those people. The Constitution calls on us to make the benefits of the public university system available to the people of North Carolina, not just 18 to 24-year-olds. So that gives you a sense of why we're motivated to tackle this challenge.
Yeah, and as close to free as practicable, I think, is the term from the Constitution. And so one of the ways of solving that affordability challenge is to enable a greater percentage of those folks to learn online. And a number of campuses, including NC State and UNC Charlotte and East Carolina and a lot of others, have been offering courses online. But in the most recent budget, the UNC system got nearly $100 million to build out a project called Kitty Hawk that we referenced earlier. That is sort of an umbrella platform that would enable it and sort of demystify the challenges of figuring out how to take online courses. Can you talk a little bit about the role you think that this platform might play in increasing adult attainment?
Sure, absolutely. I'd be happy to. It's really exciting. It's an exciting initiative that we have underway. And President Hans, remarked on this at length in his inaugural speech about the need to develop these capacities more broadly in the system. I do want to start by saying, first of all, that ECU, certainly NC State, and many others in the system have done some cutting edge work in digital learning for many, many years. And I know you'll hear more about NC State's work in that space shortly. And so the thing I want to start by saying is that the Project Kitty Hawk is designed to be complementary to those efforts and actually to help institutions that choose to partner with this new initiative to amplify their work and take it to a broader audience. But when we took a look at some data as to where students were enrolling when they were enrolling exclusively online. And you can grab these data from NC SARA. It's a nonprofit organization that works on state authorization and reciprocity across states for online students. When you look at where North Carolinians are enrolling when they enroll exclusively online, about 60,000 plus. This was in 2019. We chose to look at 2019 because it was the last kind of quasi-normal fall in all this. But when you looked in 2019, more than 60,000 were enrolling with out-of-state providers. That's nearly the same number as we're enrolling with out-of-state providers, some of whom you already mentioned in NC State, ECU, some of the community colleges. So when we saw that, we said, boy, there seems to be a lot of demand from North Carolinians in the state for this type of offering. And what's the best way, what's the most strategic way to tap into that demand? And there's a number of ways you can go about it. You could let 1,000 flowers bloom, continue to sort of say that each institution is going to create its own adult learning program. Some states have acquired a university, or universities have acquired another university, right? So in the case of Purdue purchased Kaplan, and they have an arrangement where that's their adult serving arm. University of Arizona just recently purchased Ashford University from the parent company Zovio. And then the last option, this is not exhaustive, but the last option that we considered was really to build a shared service that, again, could amplify the work that our institutions do and provide the services that many private sector online program managers do today, but do so at lower cost and operate on a nonprofit basis. Really be an engine for the state to drive the outcomes that we've all talked about: more adults completing a credential with labor market value. And I'm happy to talk more in more detail about how Kitty Hawk has been conceptualized as an organization. But that's sort of that was the thought process that we went through as we were developing the idea.
Yeah, it's a really, really exciting idea, and it's a really complicated idea too to pull off. There's some places that kind of look down the muzzle of this and say, gosh, that's just way too complicated. And there are these groups out there, and you kind of reference them, that some people call them online program managers, that say, these OPMs say, look, we know you're not an expert at online education. We are. And tell you what, we'll do the marketing for you. We'll recruit students. And all we ask in return is that we get 50 to 80% of the revenue from it. And so that's easier, but you're choosing a harder path, and perhaps one that is more sustainable financially, honestly. Can you talk about that decision?
Sure. I think, you sort of identified the let's say the challenge, but also potentially the opportunity, right? And that is that the traditional online program management industry is solving a very important issue for universities, which is, if you want to get up to speed and get online quickly, right, it's hard to build those capacities in-house in a quick and efficient way, especially for an individual university. Those that invested early on in this area had some first mover advantages, and they're generally in a better position. But generally, the OPM market has said, we'll help you. We'll basically provide the upfront cost of moving your programs online. As you pointed out, though, that's often at a pretty steep cost to the universities. It also is such that only particular programs, and often at particular levels, meaning undergrad, master's, doctorate, and so forth, are attractive to an OPM, because the economics of that revenue share work better for some programs than others. So what we've seen is a lot of elite university master's programs in particular partner with OPMs, because those, you can charge a great deal of money for those, and students are willing to pay because of the brand and the quality of the education. Where we've seen somewhat less activity, though, is on more traditional sort of undergraduate degree completion options, and degrees that a working adult might be most interested in, right? That's going to help them advance in their career with their employer. And so what we saw was really an opportunity to create a nonprofit OPM, which would free it really to operate with programs that don't fit that traditional OPM model per se, but are in direct service of the state and its goals. And so that's really kind of the blend. If you think about it, one of the ways that we've thought about it is you're really taking up what's an established business model, right? The OPM business model, which, as you pointed out, it's an organization that provides marketing, program development, instructional design, access to a technology platform, student success support, and so forth. You're marrying that established business model up to this public good, which is the university system and its mission to extend its reach, and doing so on a nonprofit basis, right? Which is going to mean that the benefits of this need to accrue to the bottom line of the state and the university being the shareholder here. And we think it's an innovative model. We think it's one that's not quite been tried in the way that we've laid it out in other places just yet. And we're really excited to get it launched, pun intended, but to get it off the ground here in the new year.
Ultimately, there's got to be a value proposition for the students as well. And we showed earlier a quote from President Hans in kind of announcing the initiative, in which he talked about three elements of it. He talked about accessibility, flexibility, and affordability. Why are those the key things if you're going to attract back adult learners that have started but not finished, maybe?
Yeah, it's exactly that value proposition that we're pursuing here, Leslie. And when I cited the 60,000 plus that are that are enrolling with out-of-state providers. When you look at the list of providers, as an adopted North Carolinian, still somewhat new to the state, but as a North Carolinian, you look at that list and you say, I think we can do better. I think we provide a higher quality education than those institutions do. And so that leads you to ask the question, what do we need to do to better attract those students? And I think you've hit the nail on the head, and President Hans referred to this in his inaugural speech and other speeches, which is students in this prospective students in this demographic category, if they're seeking information about a degree program, or they're thinking about going back to school, the traditional model where we're organized around traditional academic calendar, right? If you come to somebody in the middle of the year, right, sometimes the response is, oh, well, apply in this admission cycle and we'll see, and you can enroll next fall. You compare that to some of what you see in more traditional, more innovative adult learner programs, and they're starting, programs and courses every 6 to 10 weeks, right? So, and you're learning all year round. So there's not a whole lot of idle time for a student. So you can enroll part-time, but still make a ton of progress in a year. So it's things like that where you really, it's in many respects building kind of a new model to serve students that have different needs and preferences and constraints. And as I said, a handful of our institutions have done this to great effect already. What we want to do is enable more of them to do that. And that requires expertise, capacity, but also in some cases, some culture change around how we organize the academic calendar, how we think about the needs of those students and the support that they need as well.
All right. Thank you for getting us started. We're going to come back to you in just a few minutes, but wanted to talk about how all this shakes out on a campus and individual level. Our next guest is Dr. Susan Barcenas. She is the Adult Community College Education Program Coordinator at NC State, an associate professor, a number of other things, has 30 years of experience working in adult education. Sue, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Sue, Andrew was just talking about accessibility, flexibility, affordability, and you've noticed a lot of changes in what it takes to get an adult to come back to universities over your time. Can you talk about maybe what's changed over time and where we are now, and what it's going to take if we're going to meaningfully increase the number of adults coming back and completing degrees and getting masters and other things?
Sure. Well, I think Andrew did a good job of covering a lot of the classic approaches to adult learners attending school or attending college. And traditionally, regardless of the institutional type, most of the time adult learners went to evening schools or to separate structural areas of university rather than mainstreaming into the larger group of students that are studying. And now that's changing quite a lot. And you're seeing adult learners in programs, undergraduate and graduate, in community colleges and universities and for-profits, just everywhere. And so you can look at the proportion of adult learners compared to, filling a gap of who's studying there. But you can also look at their participation in not just what major areas of study they're choosing, what formats they're choosing, and their expectations for how they learn. And so when you talk about the investment in adult learners, making it financially accessible, one piece of it is the cost of tuition or fees. But there are other pieces of it. Financial aid policy is not exceptionally generous in terms of part-time learners. Most adult learners prefer to go to school part-time, or if they go full-time, they need significant support to maintain their families' lives and their responsibilities and attend school. That's one thing. In terms of access, we're at the very beginning of our learning curve and how to best serve adult learners online. Some online programs are asynchronous, some are synchronous, some require a lot more technology savvy skills or internet speed or other types of resources. Some are more interactive or applied than others. And we know that adult learners in general prefer to study applied subjects. They prefer to study things where they can take something they learn and immediately apply it in their job, in a professional setting, or in their personal life. And so online education holds the challenge of relevancy, of being able to convey certain subject matters or practice certain skills in an online form as opposed to face to face. So there are a lot of things I think that are changing, and that we're just getting to a point where institutions are saying, hey, we've worked on access, or we should pay more attention to access. Now maybe we have to pay attention to what the student experience is actually like once they choose to study with us.
Let's look at what's happened over the past year. This is just some data about students returning for master's programs, but it probably there's probably some transfer to the students who are returning for undergraduate programs as well. And this is just
Sure.
in a single year during COVID. You talked about the applied skills, and that might explain why computer science is sort of off the charts in enrollment. Engineering, biology, psychology, all substantially up when it comes to master's programs. Interestingly, business education, theology falling off a little bit. Can you talk about how that squares with what you're seeing at NC State and what the changes have been maybe during COVID?
Sure. Well, I don't study the NC State demographics per se. So I can tell you what we're seeing at NC State. I can tell you how this information matches maybe what's going on nationally and some of the reasons why it's happening in North Carolina. Um, COVID and the pandemic has had a huge impact in programs and subject areas that previously have avoided online formats offering education in that format. And that has really changed what students choose to study in master degree programs because they now view it as possible. So that's one thing. The economy and the political situation and some of the things going in our society is driving new occupational choices. That's another part of it. Traditionally, adult learners for decades, have preferred business leadership, healthcare or allied health professions, for example, nursing, education, and less so in the STEM areas, with the exception of IT, because it's very skills based, it's very marketable, it's not going to go away. So there are a few surprises in the slide that you just showed there that we don't understand yet. And then in the middle part of it, I would say that's been pretty consistent for a good 30 years, 30, 40 years in terms of what adult learners prefer to study.
Andrew talked some about the return on investment that adult learners see when they are coming back. Can you talk about what you're hearing from students and what you're seeing as they talk about the reasons they're coming back?
Sure. Adult learning motivations are complicated. And even though on the surface of it, we tend to talk about extrinsic or external rewards, better salary, more stability, ability to get a job or to build a career, take care of your family, those extrinsic rewards are always a big part of an adult learner's decision to return to school, but also to stay in school and complete a credential. But there are other factors. The number one factor for most adult learners is intrinsic reward, meaning increased self-confidence, feeling productive, being a role model for your children if you're a parent, building a better community or a stronger state. So intrinsic motivations always show up as very high for adult learners, and we sometimes don't pay attention to those, or we assume that those are maybe less important than getting that next job, but they're there. We use something in adult education called McCluskey's margin or load theory. And really what we're talking about is tipping points. And so adult learners report their return on investment decisions in addition to financial resources if they don't feel engaged and included in the school where they're studying, that their presence there matters. And if that happens one time too many, and then other practical barriers present themselves, they're more likely to choose to stop their studies or change institutions. There's also, I think, a big change in the gig economy and in what people expect when they're mapping out a career. And adult learners used to do a straight cost benefit analysis where they're like, this is the cost of studying. This might be the cost if I earn less wages while I'm a student, and then this is what I'll earn. Some look at what they'll earn as a starting salary. Some try to look more long term. But now they weigh lifestyle. Will I have to move? Do I want to move? Is it a kind of job where I'm pursuing a change because I can work from home or I can not have to commute as far? So there's all kinds of lifestyle factors that are emerging in studies that show adult learners are paying attention to those things. It's important to them. Family support is kind of one of the last things where we see some fairly subtle shifts, but very important ones. And I think we have a guest today who will be speaking with us about that. But we find that especially for women adult learners and people of color, that there is a shift, and it's very positive, in public perception or community or family support for returning to school. There used to be more of a stigma to adults going back to school, or some negative connotations with that. So there's much more positive support for returning to school at any age. It's becoming more normal. However, if you are a female or a person of color, you're less likely to have the actions behind the words, meaning people will say, that's great. We're really glad you're going to school. Go for it. But maybe less likely to do small things like pick up extra family household chores or pitch in and help with swapping out and substituting at parent family night at a school for a child, or babysitting, or just staying quiet and keeping busy so that the adult learner that's in your family can study and do what they need to do. So those kinds of things, we still see a gap that's more so for our more vulnerable populations in school. It just don't have as much access to those intangible supports.
It's interesting, as with almost everything, I think the theory is easier to talk about than the reality. And the reality is, if there are 1.5 million adults out there, then there are 1.5 million different sets of calculations that they are doing. Yep. Thank you. We're going to come back to you in just a second, but we wanted to, as you referenced, bring in that final piece of the puzzle. And that is the question of, what it actually takes if you are an adult who's looking down the muzzle of this decision and trying to figure out how to go forward. You may have started a degree a while back and then stepped away. There may have been a family crisis. There may have been money problems. There may have been a job that was just attractive enough to say, well, that sounds good enough to me. And you've come back to it. And then you're looking back a few years later and trying to decide whether to come back. But now there are children. In some cases, there are transportation challenges that you have. If you quit your current job to go back to school full time, will the loans be enough? Will you still be able to pay your rent or your electric bill or your car payment? Everybody has a different situation, and there's kind of a different story for everyone. So we wanted to share one of those stories on today's show with Connie Briscom, who is an adult who's just finishing up her senior year at UNC Charlotte. Not just finishing up, you've got to go till May. You've got one more semester. But the UNC Charlotte has been a real leader when it comes to helping adults come back and finish their education. I just wanted to show a slide for a second, Connie, before I ask you a question. It's about a program that UNC Charlotte started about 15 years ago called 49er Finish. This is a program that was pretty early out of the box when adult learners weren't getting as much conversation about them. So 2005, UNC Charlotte says, look, there are a bunch of former UNC Charlotte seniors that never finished. Whatever happened to them? So they started reaching out to them, and over time developed this nationally recognized program that has brought back more than 1,300 students, and 88% of them have ended up graduating. They do it by what they call concierge advising, meaning just sort of realizing that each adult learner is a little bit different. In some cases, they've waived application fees, offering scholarships. Sue mentioned that There are not as many scholarships for part-time students. They've tweaked their readmission policies. They've developed some new online courses. In some cases, they're giving credit for prior learning, and you can find out more about it at 49erfinish.charlotte.edu. So that's kind of where they got started. But since then, they've really widened things out, and they're looking for adult learners, whether they started off at UNC Charlotte or not. Connie, you did not start off at UNC Charlotte. You started off at Eastern Michigan and stepped away a few years ago, and now you've come back. And I'm wondering if you could talk about why you stopped out initially and how you decided to come back. What was it that brought you back after all this time?
Hi, thank you. I stepped away. I went to Eastern Michigan for a couple of years, and then one summer I took a job for a mortgage company, and the salary was very enticing, not having my degree yet. And then I moved down to North Carolina, early 20s, and was going to go back to school. And I thought, well, I'll do it next semester, and then I'll do it next year. And then 16 years later, and still in the mortgage industry, I didn't get my degree. And, then life happened, got married, had 4 children. And so that just kind of took over with me. And every year I kept saying, oh, I need to go back. I need to finish college. And how could I do that? And some of the other guests really brought up some really hard-hitting points that for me, looking back. So the support is definitely a big thing. I started working for the school system at Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools as a teacher assistant and in the special education department. And a few years into it, again, I went back to, this is really my passion. I have a son. We have a 17-year-old son who has Down syndrome. So I had the personal side of it. And then about 2 years ago, one of my resource teachers in the special education classroom said, you're really good at this. You really need to go back and finish that degree. So I looked around and said, this is really what I want to do. This is really what I love to do. I love seeing the rewards in my students at the end of the year and their growth. And I really want my own classroom, and I'm very passionate about the teaching part. And I think it's just really rewarding. So I took the jump. Luckily I have a very supportive husband and family. They may not always be quiet when I'm studying, like this week when I'm trying to get through my finals and my projects, but it's been a very long 2.5 years, but the light is at the end of the tunnel right now, and I just keep plugging along, and I'm looking forward to my own classroom next fall.
So there's the theory of it, and you had the theory of it. You knew what you wanted. You knew why you wanted to come back. And then there's the reality of it, which is, as you mentioned, getting quiet time to study and the logistics of raising children and all those things. What was the toughest thing for you to figure out when you decided to come back?
When I decided to come back, the hardest thing was how I was going to add one more thing into my schedule. Again, 4 teenage, very active kids. I was like, how on earth am I going to take a class and study? And so I started out, took a couple part-time classes, and I added some summer courses. And then during COVID, kind of a blessing, everything was online. So I decided, let's go back full time, as I was also working full time. And just the whole juggling part of it. I mean, juggling a whole new schedule, full-time schedule on top of my full-time family and full-time job, that was definitely the biggest challenge for me.
You mentioned the online flexibility that COVID offered. Do you think that's going to be increasingly a part of decisions that other folks make? I mean, you're in Charlotte, right? So you could have approximately figured out a way to get to the UNC Charlotte campus, but it was easier that you had the online option, right?
Correct. I think the hard part for adult learners is needing the flexibility of the online classes. Like, I'm on a leave of absence right now. This semester is all on campus, and it's during day hours, working hours, as people say. So I think a lot of adult learners, it's really hard for them to go back because the main courses that they need, the core courses for whatever degree they're going back to finish, are only offered during the day. I have a class that I've had to get permission for next semester because it was a day class, but now it's going to be online, luckily for me. But I think that is really a hard thing for adult learners. Most people are working and they want to do it, but they just don't know how they're going to balance, or they're not able to take off work. So I think if universities, and I think a lot are now offering more online courses. Again, I think COVID, everybody has gotten kind of used to the whole online thing now, with Zooms and all these kinds of things with technology. One of the guests mentioned technology as I call myself, I know I'm an adult learner, but I call myself the old learner. Technology is something that a lot of us are not great at. I think that needs to also be a course for some of us adult learners, because that is the world we live in right now, is technology. But I think by offering more courses online, maybe evening, weekends, that kind of stuff would really entice adult learners to come back.
Can you talk about what you're going to get on the back end of this? Why'd you come back, and what can you do with a degree that you couldn't do before?
I came back solely because it was a goal for me to get my college degree. 10, 15 years ago, I didn't really know exactly. I kept saying, oh, I'll just go back and get it in business. That's kind of was back then the generic BA to get. So as I worked in the school system, and again, my personal life with working with special needs, I work a lot of volunteer in the community with other organizations. We've actually started our own organization. So I have a lot of the background of the special needs, kids with disabilities of all types. So that is really what I decided to focus on over the last few years. I said, this is what I want to do. And I want my own classroom. Being a teacher assistant, I had some of the responsibilities, but I want the whole picture. Like, I want to make my own schedule. I want to be able to plan my own day with what I'm teaching my kids, being more involved with the parents at IEP meetings. As a teacher assistant, I don't get that part of it. And the personal side of it, I sit in IEP meetings for my own son, and I have a rapport with those teachers and the admin, and I want to be on the other side of that in my classroom.
And with the degree, you can be a lead teacher.
Yes, I will be a lead resource teacher and have my own classroom.
Thank you, Connie. We welcome your questions, whether you're watching on LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook Live. We welcome your questions. Please just put them in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can. I'd like to bring everybody in now and talk about one kind of demographic element to this, and that is that a lot of the people who do not have degrees in North Carolina are people of color. And so let's just take a quick look at who has degrees in North Carolina, and that might give us some clue about where the potential is when we talk about adults without a college degree. See that Asians and whites have the highest percentage of college degrees in North Carolina. People of color, other folks of color, Hispanics, Blacks, American Indians, have lower percentages of the college degrees that are out there. So there's huge potential upside for adults that maybe want to come back and get a degree who are people of color. Sue, I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about your experience. You mentioned earlier working with people of color and some of the maybe unique elements of returning to the classroom and things that we can do to make folks feel more comfortable with their return. Are there any particular strategies that are more successful in recruiting back folks that maybe don't participate at the same level for education?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that. I think some of the strategies are long-term and some are short-term. From a long-term strategy, we need more diversity in our staff and administration and faculty members and the people that students encounter as they're studying, so that they can see themselves and experience, I think, an environment that is inclusive but also rich in terms of content and skills and life experience, which plays into adult learning. We see some very population specific patterns. Even though Asian population proportionally tends to return to school more than other people of color. We see Latinx populations return to school the least. Some of that is economic challenge, some of that is English as a second language challenge, but a lot of that is community and cultural support and institutional support. We do not have a lot of experience in North Carolina and yet, and we will, I think, in serving some of the populations that we need to serve in adult learning roles. When it comes to learning and technology and vulnerable populations, it costs money and it takes infrastructure in rural areas. That is something that we expect to see increased, and I believe Andrew addressed that very eloquently, and maybe could add some thoughts to that. And Connie did too, in saying we need to have technology training. We need to have, I think, more focused services for how to choose wisely. If you're location bound and you're trying to decide what to study, what can you study that will improve your life without you having to move? If you need to move in order to start over, that's very expensive. And it's also very scary if you don't want to leave your family and your community because you're close to them relationally and socially. So we haven't quite grappled yet with some of those issues, and they are barriers to adult learners in close-knit communities returning to school. I see Andrew shaking his head a little bit in that one.
Yeah, I think Dr. Barcenas, you hit the nail on the head in a number of ways. I think basic reliable access to reliable internet and broadband is a critical issue for not just adult learners, but just generally, right? As we saw with the pandemic, we need access to broadband. I think, applauding the General Assembly for their investments in this latest session. I do want to say one thing that I think ties two parts of this conversation together in a way, which is, first of all, applause to Connie for the work that she's doing and for the effort that she's putting in to get to the finish line on that degree. And certainly applause to UNC Charlotte and its work. 49er finish, Leslie, you pointed out, it was ahead of its time in many, many respects. And so applause there. I do want to say, though, with respect to race and ethnicity, one place where we are in dire need of more graduates of color is in teaching. We know from good research that when a student has a teacher of the same race or ethnicity as they are, they tend to learn more and have higher reading and math scores. Now, that's not the only measure of success, but I think one of the challenges we face is individuals who are often operating in school districts that may not be near one of our campuses as a paraprofessional, as a teacher's aide. They have appetite and interest in earning that bachelor's degree so that they can become the teacher of record and as Connie pointed out, have their own classroom. But we need to create more options for those students to enroll in programs that are flexible enough to fit their schedule because they're working full time. And we don't want them to leave the classroom because many times they're delivering a lot of value to the students they're working with now, as Connie attested to. So just to kind of make the finer point there, Leslie, of the fact that there's a particular profession in the state that is critical to our attainment agenda writ large, that where those two things fit together, right? Greater flexibility and access for adult learners, the challenge of recruiting a more diverse pipeline of teachers, I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Can I jump in real quick and say something? One of the things that everyone seems to have brought up is the financial part of it. And I think that a lot of the universities now will offer, there's a lot of scholarships out there. And I was very blessed to have some good, great role model at the Adult Services Oasis at UNC Charlotte to kind of point that out. I think a lot of adults, when they think of scholarships at college, they think of their, kids getting scholarships academically or athletics or, athletes that get their scholarships. I don't think adults think of a scholarship for themselves. And there are so many scholarships out there for non-traditional learners, not only at the university level, but, there's cities, counties. I mean, there's so many out there right now. Again, I was fortunate. I was able to receive multiple scholarships during the time that I've been at UNC Charlotte, which has been obviously very helpful financially. So I think that's another thing that universities need to put out there and promote, even their adult services. When I first started at UNC Charlotte, when I first applied, until that first semester, I didn't even know that was a service. So, and I become more involved with that department too. So I think universities and the scholarship part of it, I think adults really need to realize that there is financial means for them to help them out and to, get them back in school if the money is one of the reasons.
Just name something that I brought up in our last program, and that is that we're heading toward what looks like potentially record low unemployment, or at least unemployment at a maybe 50-year low over the next year. Goldman Sachs is projecting national unemployment to go down to 3.6%, just crazy low. We already have half of businesses saying that they're having trouble recruiting talent, and yet places continue to relocate in North Carolina. Just yesterday, Toyota announced they'll be investing more than $1 billion in Randolph County, hiring 1,175 people who are going to need some high skills. And I'm wondering, with all this corporate interest in North Carolina and the potential for perhaps having trouble finding that talent, what the role of businesses is going to be going forward in terms of informing universities about what sort of training or skills they need workers to have, but also what they can do to what their particular responsibility is. Should they invest more in helping employees, existing employees go back, or what's their play going forward? Andrew, maybe start with you.
Sure, and certainly, I think NC State has set a very high bar for partnering with employers. When you go over, take a visit to the Centennial campus, where I believe you're sitting now, Leslie, and take a look at the fantastic work that's going on over there. I think more broadly, what I would say is there's been an interesting movement in the past, I'd say 5 to 7 years, and maybe even more recent than that, in fact, toward intermediaries, I should say, between employers and universities. And the intermediaries are designed to help employers manage their education benefits more effectively as a retention and human capital tool. So one example of that is Guild Education. It's about a $4 billion company at its latest valuation. What they've done is they've said, look, employers have tuition benefits that they can provide to employees. All right, there's tax benefits to that. But generally, most employees don't use those, and most employers aren't thinking kind of systematically about how best to use them. So what firms like a Guild, or there's a firm called InStride as well that spun off from Arizona State, what they do is they sit between employers and university partners and say, we will help you handle that transaction, right? So we'll help your employees enroll in programs that you help kind of us pick and curate, so that we make sure that what they're learning is helpful to you as an employer. And at the same time, you'll have something that helps you retain your best people, right? So you've seen this. This is where, Walmart, they used to have college for $1 a day, right, for their employees. Now that the $1 a day is gone, so now it's just free. Chipotle does this, T-Mobile. Disney, these big corporations. Now, if you work at Chipotle, I believe for 90 days, you're eligible for the education benefit. So, and what that does is it's not just enrolling and enlisting the employers as payors of the education. They're also then partners, right, with the university partners on the other side, and the fact that they're coming to the table and talking about what it is they need and their employees need, which creates this entry point, right, for higher ed and employers to interact.
Yep. We have a question over Facebook Live from Tony related to an observation that education majors nationally are dropping. And obviously, Connie, you are an example of someone who is an education major who is coming back and will have that degree. But noting the decline broadly in education majors, and Andrew earlier referenced the importance of educators of color. It makes it easier for someone to come back if there's someone teaching who looks like them. Anything we can do about that? And I'd welcome comments from anyone on that.
I think, unfortunately, with the education over the last few years has gotten a bad rap. Nobody goes into education for the money. We know that. It's the reward. And I think, obviously, our teachers are overworked and underpaid. And it would be great if that could change down the road. So I think a lot of people have shied away, or again, I hate using the excuse again about COVID, but I think it was really hard on a lot of people over that year and a half being at home and teaching and trying to get a handle on their students. And I think that took a toll on a lot of people. Mental health issues have come into play with that. So I think there's a lot of reasons over the past few years that even prior to COVID that you see the teachers are burned out and don't feel as appreciated, from doing all the things they do. And I think that's a big thing. And I think people are afraid to get into education for that reason. Right now, that's just my personal opinion. Again, I'm in it because I love it, and I love to be with my students and the reward of it. So I think it kind of goes back to that. But there are some things in our educational system that do need to be tweaked a little bit to bring the positive light back to education.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have a fantastic opportunity regarding education. We have learned, perhaps the hard way a little bit, that some of the assumptions we had about what happens in schools and what the experience is like and how we pay for it or how we invest in our children. Some of those assumptions have been challenged the past couple of years. And so parents and our society has the opportunity to take some hard questions. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It gives us the opportunity for change, although right now it may not feel like that. One of the things that I really want to mention is that we tend to treat learning as discrete. Learning happens in school. Learning happens now when we're talking about adult learners. We spend our whole lives as human beings learning. And when we frame it that way, it changes things, whether we're talking about the value of K-12 education or adult learners returning to college, but also continuing education and ongoing learning in small bites throughout your lifetime. And so I do think we need to step back and reframe and say, what does it mean as human beings in our society? How do we learn? And how should we learn? And start viewing it in that more lifelong learning lens, which is definitely reflective in my field, but I think something in societies or communities that thrive, there's a healthy framing of we are in this together. We need to learn together, so we need to figure out the best way to go about that.
That's a great point. Andrew, as we close, maybe can you just talk about what we might see next about Kitty Hawk? When is this actually going to take flight?
Sure. And as all caveats about puns related to flight apply in this, as you know. Leslie, the legislation, the budget calls for the creation of a nonprofit organization that's associated with the university system that would be governed by a board of directors, as any nonprofit organization would be. And we expect the Board of Governors to officially approve an affiliation agreement, and that board of directors in the early part of the new year, in the month of January, is what we're looking for. And so the organization itself will be fully constituted with a board and bylaws, and then we expect a founding team of leaders to be in place in January. So we are wasting no time, and because as we've talked about today, the challenges are important and acute, and so we're wasting no time in getting this started, and can't wait to come back and report on it. But as President Hans has said numerous times about this and other pieces of work that we are working on in the system, we would prefer to be judged on the outcomes we produce rather than the announcements we make about the work we're doing. So stay tuned, but we're really excited about it.
All right, Connie, let me turn to you last to close us out. What's one thing that universities could do to make it easier for folks like you to come back and get their degrees?
One thing that they can make easier, I think it is the online courses as even a full-time student. I think that would make it easiest for adult learners, since they will be able to not have to travel to a school or that kind of stuff. I think it's just easier to put in their schedule to do that online.
Mm-hmm. All right. Connie Branscombe, thank you for being with us. Andrew Kelly, Dr. Andrew Kelly is the Senior VP for Policy and Strategy at the UNC system. Dr. Sue Barcenas is many things at NC State, including an associate professor and also one of the leaders of the adult and community education efforts that NC State has. Thanks to you all for being part of this show and talking about this subject. If you are interested in this subject, have I got an idea for you? You should come to the Institute for Emerging Issues special Emerging Issues Forum coming up February 8th, 2022. You can register at our website. You can see the URL there, iai.ncsu.edu/advancing together. We're going to be in person at this point for what we expect to be a rich day of discussion. We're going to be taking a close look at what businesses and education institutions and communities can do to get North Carolina closer to our goal of 2 million North Carolinians between the ages of 25 and 44 with a credential beyond high school. Please go to the URL that you can see. We would love to see you. First and Future Live is based on an idea from IAI Communications Director Greg Hedgepath. It's produced by James Herrick, has been from the beginning. This is now the 264th episode. Social media and chat help from Kirsten Chang. Special thanks today to Joan Lorden and Janet Daniel and Debbie Smith and Abby Altany from UNC Charlotte for all their help. If you like this show, we hope you'll let your friends know about it and look for the recording on IEI's YouTube channel or on our website, emergingissues.org. That's it for today. For all of us at NC State's Institute for Emerging Issues, I'm Leslie Boney. We'll see you in the future.